Hey folks, Boss here. Welcome back to Boss Economics World, the only show that peels back the gilded wrapping paper of the global economy to show you the ticking time bomb underneath. Today, we're taking a trip to Paris. Ah, Paris. The city of love, of lights, of a national balance sheet that looks like a Jackson Pollock painting after a 3-day bender on Bordeaux and existential philosophy. You see, while you were worrying about your mortgage rates or the price of eggs, the French Republic has been quietly perfecting the art of financial self-immolation. And I'm not talking about a little bonfire. I'm talking about a full-blown, 5-alarm, fiscal inferno. Let's get a stat up on the screen, shall we? That's right. 5,000 euros. Every time your heart beats, France sinks deeper. By the time I finish this sentence, they've added enough debt to buy a brand new Peugeot. By the end of this video, they'll have racked up enough to buy a dozen luxury apartments overlooking the Seine. This isn't just kicking the can down the road, this is strapping the can to a SpaceX rocket and firing it at the sun, hoping it burns up before it comes back down. But here's the kicker, the punchline to the world's most expensive joke: the markets are finally starting to notice. And when the markets notice, things get interesting. So grab your popcorn, because we're about to dissect how the world's 7th largest economy is sleepwalking into a sovereign debt crisis that could make the Eurozone meltdown of the 2010s look like a minor squabble over the dinner bill. To understand this mess, you first have to understand the French psyche. Our story starts in a palace office in Paris, where a man named Pierre Moscovici, a guy who's seen it all as a former finance minister and now head of the Court of Accounts, drops an absolute truth bomb. He says France's inability to stop spending is a national characteristic, part of our social contract. Let that sink in. He's not blaming a political party or a specific president. He's saying, this is who we are. Overspending isn't a bug, it's a feature. This social contract is a beautifully vague, almost romantic term for having one of the most bloated public sectors on earth. Let's look at the numbers. In 2023, French public spending was 58.3% of its GDP. To put that in perspective, the OECD average was a mere 45.9%. Germany, their frugal neighbor and the Eurozone's anchor, was at 49.7%. France spends a larger chunk of its national income on the state than any other developed economy, bar none. This isn't a new phenomenon. It's the culmination of decades of what I call crisis Keynesianism. Every time there's a problem, a financial crisis, a pandemic, a spike in energy prices, a Tuesday, the solution is the same: open the public purse and flood the zone with cash. 2008 global financial crisis: while Germany implemented painful labor market reforms, France spent heavily on bailouts and subsidies, and never really clawed it back. Their debt to GDP ratio, once on par with Germany's in 1999, started its meteoric rise. The Yellow Vests in 2018, President Macron tried to implement a modest fuel tax. The public response? Nationwide riots. His solution? He caved, delivering billions in fresh spending and tax cuts for the lower income brackets. The message was clear: in France, austerity is political suicide. COVID-19, Macron went full, whatever it costs. The Court of Accounts, Moscovici's own institution, pegged the cost of just 1 year of COVID measures at 83 billion euros. The energy crisis, another 72 billion euros spent to shield households and businesses from price shocks. Each binge leaves the state fatter, the debt higher, and the political will to diet weaker than ever. They've been living on a diet of fiscal creme brulee, and now the bill is due. The cost to service this mountain of debt is set to hit 75 billion euro next year. That's more than their entire defense budget. France will soon spend more money paying interest to bondholders than it does equipping its army. Think about that. For years, France got away with it. How? Because of the magic of the European Central Bank. With interest rates at or below zero, borrowing was basically free. You could rack up trillions in debt, and it barely cost you a thing. It was the great financial illusion of the 2010s. But the party's over. Inflation returned with a vengeance, and the ECB, led by Christine Lagarde, a Frenchwoman, ironically had to jack up interest rates faster than at any time in its history. And suddenly, that 112% debt-to-GDP ratio isn't a theoretical problem anymore. It's a real, tangible, cash-bleeding wound. This is where the bond vigilantes come in. Now, for those of you new to the game, bond vigilantes is the cool, 1980s term for large institutional investors, pension funds, insurance companies, hedge funds, who get spooked by a country's fiscal policy. They start dumping that country's bonds, which drives the price down and the yield up. They effectively become a shadow government, capable of forcing politicians to do what they won't do on their own: get their house in order. Don't believe me? Ask former UK Prime Minister Liz Truss. In September 2022, she unveiled a mini-budget of unfunded tax cuts. The bond market took one look, decided it was fiscally insane, and went on a seller's strike. UK bond yields exploded. The pound cratered. The Bank of England had to stage an emergency intervention to prevent a systemic collapse of pension funds. Truss was out of a job in 49 days. The market gave her less time in office than it takes for a head of lettuce to wilt. Now, the Vigilantes are saddling up and riding towards Paris. The most watched metric in the Eurozone is the spread at the difference between a country's 10-year bond yield and Germany's, the so-called Bund. This spread is the market's real-time risk premium. A low spread means the market sees you as safe as Germany. A high spread means they think you're a gamble. For years, France's spread was razor-thin. Now, it's climbed to levels not seen since the dark days of the Eurozone crisis. And here is the most humiliating chart of all for French policymakers. Look at that. France, the co-founder of the EU, the supposed pillar of stability alongside Germany, now has to pay more to borrow money than Spain, Portugal, and even Greece, the country that almost brought the whole system down a decade ago. The former pigs are now looking at France and saying, "Get your act together." The irony is so thick you could cut it with a baguette. Italy, the perennial poster child for fiscal chaos, has seen its risk premium over France all but disappear. 3 years ago, Italy had to pay nearly 200 basis points more than France. Today, the gap is negligible. This isn't because Italy has become a paragon of fiscal virtue, it's because the market now sees France as being in the same high-risk club. So, the problem is obvious. The market is flashing red. The solution, while painful, is clear: you have to cut spending. So why don't they? Welcome to the French political circus. The National Assembly is in a state of complete and utter gridlock. After Macron's gamble on snap elections backfired spectacularly last year, the parliament is split into 3 warring tribes that refuse to cooperate. 1. The Macronist Center, a weakened bloc with no majority, trying to push through unpopular cuts. 2. The Leftist Alliance, a chaotic coalition of socialists, Greens, and far-left firebrands who view any spending cut as a declaration of war on the working class. 3. The far right, led by Marine Le Pen, who are happy to watch the center burn and will block anything that might make the government look competent, all while promising their own brand of protectionism and populist spending. The result is a revolving door of prime ministers. The current one, François Bayrou, is the 4th in 2 years and is about to face a no-confidence vote he will almost certainly lose. His proposal for 44 billion euros in cuts has been met with a block-everything movement. It's political quicksand. Any move towards fiscal responsibility is met with immediate political annihilation. This paralysis is amplified by a deep-seated public paradox. A recent poll found that 78% of French people agree that spending needs to be cut. Fantastic, right? A national consensus. But when asked where the cuts should come from, the consensus evaporates. Everyone agrees there's a problem, but as one pollster put it, everyone also agrees it's up to others to pay. This is the fundamental flaw in modern high-spending democracies. The benefits of public spending are concentrated and visible, while the costs are diffuse and abstract, until they're not. France has reached the "until they're not" moment. So, what happens next? I see 3 possible paths forward for France, ranging from bad to catastrophic. Scenario 1, the slow squeeze. This is the muddle-through scenario. The government remains paralyzed. They pass a budget by the skin of their teeth, with watered-down cuts that fail to impress the markets. Bond yields stay elevated but don't explode. Credit rating agencies gradually downgrade France from AA to A, then BBB. The country slips into a low-growth, high-debt trap, much like Japan over the past 2 decades. It's not a crash, but a long, slow, managed decline. A nation known for its joie de vivre becomes a case study in economic malaise. For a country with France's pride and global ambition, this might be the most psychologically devastating outcome. Scenario 2, the market strike. This is the scenario that keeps finance ministers up at night. A political event, another failed budget, a snap election called by a desperate Macron, a particularly inflammatory speech by a populist leader proves to be the final straw for investors. The bond vigilantes don't just circle, they strike. The sell-off is fast and brutal. The spread over Germany blows out to 150, maybe 200 basis points. The headlines are screaming about Frexit risk. The ECB is forced to decide whether to intervene and save France, but they will demand a heavy price, a draconian austerity package enforced by Brussels, reminiscent of what was imposed on Greece. This would lead to mass social unrest, making the yellow vests look like a polite tea party. The political fallout would be immense, potentially paving the way for an extremist government to rise from the ashes. Scenario 3, the political earthquake. This is the big one. The catalyst is the 2027 presidential election. Frustrated with years of gridlock and economic pain, the French electorate finally hands the keys to the Élysée Palace to a populist firebrand like Marine Le Pen. Her platform would likely involve a cocktail of more public spending, protectionism, and a confrontational stance towards the EU. The market reaction would be instantaneous and apocalyptic. It would trigger a full-blown French sovereign debt crisis. But here's the critical difference: France isn't Greece. Greece's economy was 2% of the Eurozone GDP. France is nearly 20%. It's the second largest economy in the bloc and a core pillar of the entire system. France is, quite literally, too big to fail and too big to save. A French debt crisis wouldn't just threaten the euro, it would threaten to bring down the entire global financial system. The fallout would make the 2008 Lehman Brothers collapse look like a minor fender bender. France's predicament is more than just a local problem. It's a test case for the entire Western democratic model. Can a nation that has built its identity on a cradle-to-grave welfare state, funded by ever-increasing debt, change course before it hits a wall? Or is the political price of fiscal sanity simply too high to pay? For decades, the French have been sustained by a grand illusion that they could have German-level creditworthiness with Mediterranean-level spending habits. That illusion was enabled by a world of 0% interest rates. That world is gone, and the harsh light of a 4% world is exposing the deep structural cracks in the French model. As Pierre Moscovici grimly noted, thinking that the problem can continue will be an illusion. The market is the ultimate arbiter of reality. It doesn't care about social contracts or political ideologies. It cares about whether it will get paid back. And right now, it's starting to have serious doubts. The clock is ticking for Paris. The world is watching. And you can be sure we'll be here to cover the fireworks. Stay cynical, folks.